The Vietnam War was a dark chapter in human history, with both sides committing atrocities that still haunt the world today. The Vietcong and US soldiers carried out some of the worst punishments during the war, leaving behind a legacy of pain and suffering that is hard to comprehend. In this video, we will discuss what were these punishments and why did they occur. During the Vietnam War from 1964 to 1973, captured US soldiers faced brutal treatment at the hands of the Vietcong. Rather than recognizing them as prisoners of war, the Vietnamese saw them as outlaws in an undeclared war. The prisoners were subjected to merciless and systematic torture to extract confessions, military intelligence, and even staged propaganda. The severe beatings were routine and often resulted in the death of the prisoner. The Vietcong employed a range of cruel and inhumane methods to extract information from American soldiers, including torture techniques like waterboarding. These methods were so effective that even highly trained soldiers eventually broke under extreme physical and mental pressure. Prolonged isolation, poor living conditions, and lack of sustenance were just some of the ways in which the Vietcong manipulated the mental and physical state of prisoners. Despite their immense training, American soldiers refused to cooperate willingly, enduring the torture until they were eventually broken. Despite two notable escape attempts by American POWs during the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese were successful in extinguishing any hope and motivation to continue fighting. Two POWs, Navy Lieutenant George Coker and U.S. Air Force Captain George McKnight, made a daring escape from the Dirty Bird prison camp, but their efforts were in vain as they were recaptured just 15 miles away and transferred to Alcatraz prison. This facility specialized in solitary confinement in small, dark, and filthy cells, where they endured regular torture and were held in confinement for at least 15 hours a day. The period of the most severe cruelty took place in the months after the May 1969 escape attempt, when Air Force Captains John Dramizzi and Edwin Atterbury planned an intricate escape plan, complete with clothing and accessories to blend in with the native population. However, this plan only granted them a few fleeting moments of freedom before they were recaptured. The repercussions of their actions resulted in barbaric reprisals against all prisoners, regardless of their involvement. Navy Lieutenant Commander Red McDaniel received over 700 lashes and electric shocks during prolonged whipping sessions. Dramizzi endured savage beatings and was forced to write and record apologies while being forced to listen to the screams of his partner Atterbury, who was ultimately killed. Both the Vietnamese and American soldiers exhibited cruel and ruthless behavior, and there's no justification for causing such suffering to any living being. The U.S. Army committed numerous war crimes during the Vietnam War, which are supported by testimonies, confessions, and photographic evidence of brutal and bloody carnage. Despite this evidence, it is easy for the U.S. government to turn a blind eye and sweep these atrocities under the rug. One of the few incidents that were made public is the My Lai massacre, which occurred on March 16, 1968. On this tragic day, approximately 500 innocent civilians in the town were mercilessly murdered by Captain Ernest Medina's unit, including men, women, the elderly, and children who offered no resistance. On the morning of March 16, 1968, Charlie Company, including Lieutenant William Calley, landed near a village in Vietnam where they committed the horrific My Lai massacre. Captain Medina's subordinates claimed that they were instructed to shoot anything that moved, leading to the murder of nearly all the inhabitants, including young children, the elderly, and pregnant women. Calley alone ordered the execution of 150 people in a ditch. The soldiers set homes on fire and threw grenades into caves where families had taken refuge. Only thanks to a U.S. helicopter crew that noticed what was happening were there any survivors. Calley was the only person accused and convicted of the massacre. As expected, the U.S. government and military only acknowledged 200 civilian casualties that day due to an alleged artillery error. Lieutenant William Calley, an important figure in the My Lai massacre, received a life sentence that was later reduced to 20 years. Then 10 years, and ultimately only served 4 years in the comfort of his apartment. The Vietcong, despite being largely made up of guerrillas, used unconventional strategies and took advantage of their environment to decimate their enemy. Their use of fear as a weapon demoralized the U.S. soldiers, but their actions are remembered as atrocities for the attacks they made on villages. The Vietcong systematically murdered men, women, and children through their special activity cells to prove that the South Vietnamese government could not protect them. They set up mortars outside refugee camps, placed mines on roads commonly used by villagers, targeted civilian buses, and indiscriminately bombed major cities with 122mm rockets. During their most brutal phase, The Vietcong killed over 1,500 South Vietnamese civilians per month. Between 1964 and 1971, an estimated 30,062 civilians and political officials were killed, with another 45,500 being kidnapped. One of the worst massacres committed by the Vietcong occurred during the Battle of Hue, which began on January 31, 1968 and lasted for 26 days. During this time, the inhabitants of Hue experienced sheer terror as the Vietcong soldiers arrived and received orders to judge and annihilate anyone they deemed an enemy, spy, traitor, or simply not sympathetic to their cause. They showed no mercy whatsoever, not only eliminating political opposition and foreign residents, but also murdering entire families. Children, women, school teachers, American civilians, and religious leaders all fell victim to this horrifying tragedy. Journalists such as Don Oberdorfer compiled these facts by interviewing the inhabitants of Hue at the end of 1969. His notes contain the last moments of thousands of innocent people who do not deserve to die in such a brutal manner. One of these people was Pham Van Thuong, a janitor at the Government Information Office. He hid with his two young children, a 3-year-old girl and 5-year-old boy, and 2 nephews. When they were discovered by Vietcong soldiers, they were shot on the spot simply because of their association with the office. Their bodies were then put on display in the street. Over the course of months, numerous mass graves containing thousands of bodies with signs of torture, beatings, execution by firearms, and even being buried alive were discovered throughout the Hue region. It is estimated that around 6,000 civilians and prisoners of war were killed by the Vietcong during this massacre. In addition to fighting battles against the Vietcong, the American presence also devastated the greenery of the jungles and contaminated the rivers and lands with a powerful chemical that still causes physical and psychological after effects over 50 years later. Known as Agent Orange, this herbicide and defoliant was composed of the extremely toxic TCDD dioxin group. The U.S. forces sprayed Agent Orange on approximately 2.5 million hectares of forest in southern Vietnam to destroy the vegetation that served as a protection and hiding place for the enemy. Under the name of Operation Ranch Hand, approximately 6,000 missions were carried out, approved by then U.S. President John F. Kennedy, who concealed from the public how harmful this chemical would be for the inhabitants of the land. The devastating effects of Agent Orange have led to malformations in newborns, serious diseases, and damage to vegetation. Approximately 45 million liters of Agent Orange were used, exposing 4.8 million Vietnamese to serious soft tissue diseases, benign lymphoma, leukemia, and chlorosis. The chemical also affects fetuses in the wombs of infected individuals and is linked to congenital malformations. Current data shows that in the last 3 decades alone, about 150,000 children have been born with diseases such as cleft lip, cleft palate, spinal clefts, and nerve disorders due to Agent Orange exposure, with at least 20,000 of those originally exposed dying from its terrible effects. However, some U.S. Army soldiers were also not spared from its effects, as Admiral Elmo Zumwalt, former U.S. Chief of Naval Operations, reported that over 1,000 U.S. soldiers were exposed to this dioxin. In Vietnam, offering favors related to pleasure is not only frowned upon but also considered a crime. Despite strict moral judgments, it was estimated in 2013 that there were over 71,000 sex workers, also known as ladies of sin, throughout the country. It is a well-known fact that during times of war, soldiers often seek entertainment and companionship. In Vietnam, where the conflict was particularly lucrative, this was no exception. Many American soldiers sought the company of young women from the surrounding areas, resulting in numerous scandals involving infections, non-consensual encounters, and even children who were not acknowledged. It is estimated that during the Vietnam War there were around 300,000 women working in the sex trade, scattered throughout the country. They would often congregate in bars frequented by both American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians. However, it was not only these women who were subject to the soldiers' desires. There were cases of soldiers taking advantage of maids, laundresses, cooks, and any other woman who performed work for them, sometimes with full consent, and many others forced. The Vietnam War was a brutal conflict that saw both the Vietcong and U.S. soldiers resort to extreme measures, including torture and punishment, to gain an upper hand. The consequences of these actions have had a lasting impact on the lives of those involved and their families, as well as the country of Vietnam as a whole.